Ah, yes, friends, on a Wednesday, because that's what happens when there's a Monday night football game for the New York Football Giants. It is OGP, the One Giant podcast, where I'm your host, Adam Armbrecht, also covering the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast. And there with me, as always, the generational season ticket holder, healthy, wealthy, wise, and rested Mr. Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir?
Work function last night. Ended up staying out far too late. The night before, Giants are on Monday Night Football. That doesn't end until late in the night, so I'm not caught up on sleep, Adam. So I am definitely not healthy, wealthy, or well rested right now at the moment.
Could have been a little bit different if the New York Football Giants had pulled out the victory. They lose to the Kansas City Chiefs on the road, 20-17. We're going to get into the game first and foremost. We're also going to go ahead and take a look at the trade deadline that wrapped up yesterday at 4 p.m. What happened, maybe a little bit around the league, but obviously specifically with the New York Football Giants, and then some takeaways here as the Giants are now 2-6, essentially midway through the season, though we know that extra game, so we have to wait until halftime of this upcoming game to say we're officially midway through the season. But let's start with the game, Kansas City. You and I both looked at this one and said you called for the loss, so you were right in that regard. I called for a win. We both called for a high scoring affair. The irony for me is the thing that we said would be impossible would be to for the Giants to be in a relatively low scoring game against the Chiefs and still be able to come out on top. And yet if you had told us going in, right, which one would any Giants fan have said, you hold the Kansas City Chiefs to 20 points? Do you want it? Everybody would have taken that right off the bat and said, we'll take our chances that we can score 21 points in this game. And yet the Giants come up short.
It's it's frustrating because to your point, Adam, I never dreamed that this game would be first to 20 wins. Like it just didn't feel like that, knowing that the Chiefs defense was so terrible. I mean, my favorite bet going into the day was the Giants to have 8.5 points encapsulation of why he's if you if you look at it, the Giants had every opportunity to win this game. This was not a the whole time you felt like the Giants were going to lose. They had the lead for a good portion of the game. They were looking great. It, I'll give you a couple of stats, and I want to get your feedback. The
Yeah.
the Giants. If you told me we were going to hold the Kansas City Chiefs to 20 points, if you told me we were going to win this turnover battle, and you told me that Daniel Jones was going to have a better passer rating than Patrick Mahomes, do you win the game? Every single person would say the Giants won that game by 10 points or more, right? And yet here we are, another loss, minute to go field goal, which feels like every single game we're losing by a field goal at this point, except for the Rams game. It feels like we could have won that game. And just saying that rings so hollow because it just feels like we do that. It's like Groundhog Day. Every single time you and I get on here after a loss, we're like, that was another one the Giants could have had. And it's like, well, how many of those can we actually have until we just say, we are not a good team. We don't do the fundamentals well. And this is the type of thing that happens to a team like us.
Of course, right. And that's what I think we're going to get into here as we start to touch on Joe Judge in a little bit, and then just kind of this team overall, right? What's the running theme on a week-to-week basis? But to your point, the Giants come out in this one, they start on defense, they hold, they force a turnover by Patrick Mahomes in the red zone. It's like it's everything that you want, right? Like the lucky or unlucky bounces of the football. Well, Mahomes does one of those little jump passes. It banks off of a receiver's helmet, flies in the air. Julian Love grabs the pick. You think, okay, like these are the kind of breaks you need. And then Daniel Jones comes right out. And if you were watching, I wasn't sure which way I was going to go. I actually did watch this game on the Manning cast because the game is up now there. They've done a good job of making sure the game is up. And I just figured, okay, I started here, I'll stay here. And you saw it, right? You have Peyton Manning. I mean, he really lambasted Daniel Jones for saying, you're locked in on your receiver. You don't take your eyes off him at all. And throughout this game, he mentioned how Mahomes, right? Looking downfield, looking downfield, looking downfield, and then taking the check down. And that comes down to protection on the offensive line and affording the ability for a quarterback to do that. But in that same play, Eli Manning's response, it's not ideal, right? Like it's it's unfortunate that those two things happen right in succession because it's the thing that we've been waiting for, this defense to step up. No Lorenzo Carter in this one. You had a lot more Ocean Ximenez. He played a role late in this game, obviously, but they did, the New York Football Giants defense, exactly what other teams have done. run that shell defense. And the Giants have used this all season long, but they did some nice little wrinkles in this game using James Bradbury against Travis Kelce, right? Like Patrick Graham seemed to figure out and do some of the things we liked so much last season. Wrinkles, little scheme differences, switching some stuff up, and really controlling the Kansas City Chiefs offense, which has been struggling of late. So when you get that turnover early in this game and Daniel Jones gives it right back, boy, it is such a gut punch to say these boxes that you need to get checked to win a game like this, they're getting checked. And yet, every time that one of those gets checked, one of the boxes you say, don't check these. Do not check off the offensive turnover. Do not check off Daniel Jones interception. And they go right back and do that. And it's just a part of the inconsistency that we've talked about where we want all three phases to play either good together or bad together. We still cannot seem to accomplish that on a week-to-week basis.
And yes, it seems like all of a sudden the defense is playing the way that we hoped they would have played by limiting a top 5 offense to 20 points that was at home.
Yep.
But Adam, it's just you look at all these stats. The Giants won the turnover battle.
Yeah.
Daniel Jones threw more touchdowns than Patrick Mahomes. Daniel Jones had better yards per completion than Patrick Mahomes. Like every single thing that you're looking at, like the advanced metrics, like Travis Kelce had a stinker of a game. He didn't play well. So that like the defense played great, and yet the Giants lose. And it feels like the list is getting longer and longer, and you can't make excuses for this team anymore. It's like the Washington football team game could have been a win. The Atlanta Falcons game could have been a win. This game could have been a win. That's a swing of 3 losses that go to the win column. Like it's a swing of 6 positions in the division in terms of like wins on your schedule. But I don't know. I think it's time
Well, by the
that
way, because you don't get to say, right? This is where early in the season you go, oh my goodness, one play could have won the Washington game. Okay. One play could have won the Atlanta game. Okay. One play could have won the Kansas City game. Okay. Well, at some point you go, yeah, and teams that are better or above average, they make those one plays, or at least you get one out of those 3 opportunities, right? Now we're at the point where it's 3 sample sizes of not having that happen. So it does become a bit of an identity piece. And that's what I want to get into around Joe Judge and some of his post-game comments here in a second. But real quickly on your point, not even going into games where you have a better QB rating than the opposing QB, or when you throw for more touchdowns than the opposing QB, just the winning percentage. When you win the turnover battle, the winning percentage is 65%. That's your opportunity to win a game when you win the turnover battle. So when you do the positive things and still come out on the losing end, it means that you're actually doing so much more negative in other aspects, whether it's in a single play or over the course of series. You're doing so much damage to yourself in all 3 phases that you actually take away what is a high level positive attribute. And you say, no, don't worry, we can drag that thing back down. And that's, I think, indicative of where this team is overall. Any last, before we get into we're not going to cover too much of the nonsense from Joe Judge as far as the microphone thing, but it does tie into the game. But any other game takeaways from a player standpoint, offensively, any of that kind of stuff that you want to throw in before we move on?
Yeah, it's just strange. Like it felt like Kadarius Toney was a little bit of an afterthought. Sterling Shepard gets a quad injury, he gets hurt again. Kadarius Toney gets hurt again. It's just like we can't have nice things on offense last for more than like a week or a half or a quarter. But I want to touch back on one thing that we were mentioning about all the like 1 plays away in all of these games. Adam, let's just be honest. The teams that we're talking about are, we lost the Denver Broncos game. They're basically a 500 team. We lost to the Atlanta Falcons. They're a 500 team. We lost to the Kansas City Chiefs. They're a 500 team. We got blown out by 2 playoff teams in the Rams and the Cowboys. But like, okay, so what we're saying is like, we're good enough to beat a bottom tier team. And then we're good enough to compete with teams that are close to 500. Like, is that what success looks like? It doesn't, like, I don't see the progression and progress if now all of a sudden we're saying like, mediocrity of getting to 7-10 is a successful season. It's like, well, we've just been bad for so long. Where is the progress? Where is the progression? Where are the things that you can say, thank goodness we have that, or we've solved this issue and we know going in, now it's just a matter of putting XYZ together. Like, I'm not seeing it anymore. And it's getting more and more frustrating, not knowing if we have the right coach, if we have the right scheme. Like, it's just all around not good right now.
Right. So let's move on to that because there's a bigger picture piece that will tie into the back end to your point. But when you look over the wins and losses, they only have 2 wins. And now it looks like, listen, did Carolina get a win and get back to 500? Sure. But we have a much different perspective on them now than we did at the start of the year. Likewise, the Saints game, okay, you did get that win, and they've been a team that's finding a way to have success. Lost Jameis Winston over the weekend, but okay, you can put that in the category of a quality win, but I think we all agree it's not the same Saints team. The problem is that early in the year, when you would say, whether it's Atlanta, a 500-ish team, whether it's Washington, a below 500 team, right, or even the Broncos, like those first 3 games, when you look at those and you say, I don't care if it's the start of the year, the middle of the year, the end of the season, whenever it is, you have to find a way to be a team if you want to be at least reasonable in the NFL to say, okay, we're better than the back third of the league, right? And then the middle third, it's a 50-50 toss up. And against elite teams, we want to play close and hopefully have a chance in a couple of those games, right? But as it stands right now, it's we can beat the bad teams sometimes. We can sometimes just come up embarrassingly in those games. And then when you get into these, like the Kansas City Chiefs, we said this coming in. This is not the Kansas City Chiefs of the last 2 years. They may be that team by the end of the year, but they're clearly trying to figure out a lot of stuff. Patrick Mahomes is figuring out what it looks like to adjust when a defense says, no more deep ball, no more big fun play action for you, right? Like we're going to make you make the smart plays consistently throughout a game. So this isn't the same team. So that was a winnable game that you have to go out and get no matter what. I don't want any of the excuses. Now, this one obviously ends on a somewhat big play. You get the offsides penalty against O'Shane Ximines on what was, at first people said, oh, Mahomes knew he had a free play there. No, he didn't. He was going for that pass. It was going to come up short. It was picked off. That was not he knew that somebody was offsides there, at least by my estimation. I think that he thought that he was rolling out and making a big play because, again, you get him frustrated enough or you make a quarterback of his talent try to contain himself. At some point, he's going to try to pop one off. So it ends up getting brought back on that penalty. It's twofold. The post-game piece, I said, we're not going to talk about Joe Judge and this microphone gate, whatever. I'm going to focus on something different because you can tell me this has happened all year. I wouldn't expect the NFL necessarily to acknowledge it, but it also seemed like a lame duck excuse. These are now multiple times. Now, I want to ask you, the Giants team overall has not been well disciplined. They take a lot of penalties. We know they're dealing with a lot of injuries. But do you at some point do you put it on the coaching staff, on the head coach to say, "Hey, you don't have a well-disciplined team." And we now have a couple, last year they were far more disciplined, didn't take a lot of penalties, didn't win a lot of games. This year they're not winning games, they're taking a lot of penalties. Do you think it's coaching or do you think that the injuries can play a factor in this because you are rotating in a lot of different guys, a lot of different bodies and there is some lack of continuity there in that regard and talent?
Uh, well, you bring up a great question, and I do think that it does fall on the coaching staff. There's a reason why the Raiders have always been like one of the most penalized teams in the league, and it's like the culture that the team brings. Right? I don't think that's a secret to anyone. I think you're pulling on the thread of a much larger discussion. I think both you and I have liked Joe Judge. We liked like his toughness. We liked his grit and now it's just turning into having more questions than answers about Joe Judge for me, especially when you start thinking about like, okay, what does he hang his hat on as the head coach of the New York Football Giants? Like, is he an offensive savant? Is he a defensive guru? He comes from a special teams background. The special teams is ranked 13th in the league. Like they're kind of middle of the road and the team's taking penalties. There's bad clock management for the Giants, going into the half of the last game. It just seems like, letting Jason Garrett have a very ultra conservative play calling routine for the most part. I'm questioning like where does Joe Judge get his imprint on this team?
Yeah, and the thing is to me, because it's okay to be at a head coaching level, because we've seen guys that are really good, great offensive or defensive minds, and they struggle to be a head coach. It's okay if your role as the head coach is a motivator and manager of personalities. Like that's all right, right? When you have the right coordinators in place, that can be your calling card, and that can be Joe Judge's calling card.
Right.
And to some extent, I can say, listen, the team hasn't become fractured at all. Everyone is still pulling in the same direction, right? Like no one has splintered away from this. We've heard players like Sterling Shepard come out in support of Joe Judge, and not because it's been questioned, but just saying, yeah, we believe in the team, we believe what we're doing. We haven't been getting the wins, we want to get the wins, etc. But I'll go into to your point about the timeouts. you can tell me that there's value in using it, especially when you're on the road, hostile, noisy environment like Kansas City. Okay, like if you need to burn a timeout here or there, completely fine, right? You can use them when you want to. I'm not going to really hold your feet to the fire too much on it, but very consistently throughout this year, we've seen timeouts get burned throughout the first half and throughout early portions of the second half, where the Giants have come down to the end of the half or the end of the game and not had the ability to have a timeout to use. And on top of that, another one that got called out by Peyton Manning on the Manning cast was at the end of the first half when it was 2:41 to go. It was the end of the half or end of the game. I don't want to get this wrong. Might have been end of the game. 2:41 on the clock. The Giants have only one timeout left. And Peyton and Eli debated this about, yeah, but you only have the one. So now you can say, right, because you already used two earlier in the half. But by not calling the timeout there at 2:40, you let them burn it all the way down to the 2-minute warning. So you save the timeout, but it's always that this is, I think, standard across the league. You can't put time back on the clock, right? So even if you think you want to have the timeout to try to use, you have to look at it and say, if we burn it here, because they're in the red zone, because we know there's only so much that they're going to try to accomplish here, they're not going to risk too much here. They're not going to be too scared about us offensively, only having put up 17 points in the game so far. Let's go ahead and use the timeout here. And let's give ourselves the opportunity, to have as much time left to do something on offense. Now, you can say, look at the results. The Giants couldn't do anything at the end of this game, but maybe you would have had a minute 30 there instead of 45 or 50 seconds. And that can play out differently. Your opportunities are different there. You don't have to go all out looking for 15, 20-yard chunk plays. I'm using this game specific as the microcosm of game management, right? The one thing you need to be able to hang your hat on as a head coach, it's like we made fun of McCarthy, right? For Dallas. There's no idea how much time was left, what was going on. Like that, it's inexcusable. And at this point, you're well into your second season. You're at the threshold now where you say these type of mistakes are inexcusable. And if not for the fact that the Giants are a bad team record-wise, I think people would look at Joe Judge and maybe call it out even more. And it's been talked about, but call that out even more, like McCarthy, where it's like, hey, you're a good team. You're supposed to be winning these games, right? You can't make these type of silly mistakes. It's almost like it's this package deal for the Giants. Well, they've been bad and there's injuries and they don't win a lot of games. So it almost kind of goes hand in hand that you're going to have these type of fumbles at some point. Again, like the game, you need to start checking the positive boxes and not checking the negatives. And the Giants don't seem to be able to do that.
Yeah, it does feel like Joe Judge gets a little bit of a pass because the bar is set so low. The Giants are not winning games. They're not looking to go to the playoffs. And so, like, one of those timeouts costs the Giants potentially a win over the course of the season. What does that change? It go, from 3-14 to 2-15. Like, it doesn't
Right.
really move the needle. Whereas, when Mike McCarthy makes these blunders, it could be the difference between NFC Championship game and Super Bowl, which is like a
Right.
drastically different concept. But I think it's something that we don't discuss much on this show about, kind of putting the big question mark around Joe Judge. Jason Garrett has, I think, slightly evolved over the course of the year. I think the first couple of weeks, it was like the most ultra conservative play calling ever. I think you could see that in games like against the Chiefs, they're running all these reverses and trick plays and having wide receivers throw passes downfield. Like they're at least trying to
Yeah.
expand the creativity of the offense. There's an evolution there. With Joe Judge, I don't know if I see the evolution of understanding game management, clock management, or any of that type of stuff.
No, but by the way, it was also funny on the broadcast to hear when Kadarius Toney, they ran that play and they're like not often you run a wide receiver pass play where the receiver takes the check down option, right? Like it was such an interesting. Usually it's like, and then you bomb it out. Now I actually think, because we saw this early in the year when Kadarius Toney didn't make the pass at all and just ran for a couple of yards and went down. I actually like that in Kadarius Toney, that when he gets those opportunities, he's not automatically going and then I pull the trigger, right? He goes, and then I assess, I take a look, where's the defense, where's my best option, and he makes the smart football play. But to your point, I want to move on to the trade deadline passing and kind of big picture for this Giants here. But I will say it's interesting, and we talked about this last episode. We've been massaging this a little bit over the last handful of weeks here of Jason Garrett. We can say the thing of, oh, well, he's too conservative. Maybe he's trying to protect Daniel Jones along the way. Maybe you see this evolving a little bit. Now, the question we don't have the answer to is that Joe Judge saying, hey, let's go, let's ramp this up? Is that Joe Judge saying, hey, I want Kitchens to be more vocal in what's going on there? Or is it just Jason Garrett, who's been in the NFL a very long time, slowly but surely evolving this offensive playbook based on the personnel and the development of Daniel Jones. And if that is the case, footnote here, something to take home, put in your pocket, and think about. It's remember, Jason Garrett, he's got a lot of head coaching experience. I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that that's a consideration here from the top down, from John Mara down, that there is some possibility that Jason Garrett is going to be in consideration to take over this team should things continue to trend in a very bad direction this season. You can respond to that if you wanted. You don't have to, but
Oh,
we will turn our attention to what happened with the trade deadline
Adam.
and where the Giants go from here.
Yeah, I mean that is like you're painting a picture that is like a nightmare for Giants fans. Like if we're
Of
gonna
course.
if the season is in the tank and we know that Gettleman's not going to be here, and it sounds like Joe Judge isn't the answer. I don't know anyone on the planet that says Jason Garrett is as the head coach, elevating him, promoting him is the solution to any problem. But I do appreciate that the Giants, being the type of organization that they are, would say, yes, let's give it Jason Garrett an
Yes.
interview. He has head coaching experience. He would be the safest, unsexiest, don't move the needle pick that the Giants would ever have.
By the way, and let me just say, like, this is me painting again, like you say, like it's like the internal Giants picture, right? John Mara,
Right,
like
right.
wouldn't be on the beyond the realm that they would choose to do this. Let me ask you a quick question before we get into the free agency, what the Giants did not do at the deadline. Is there a world? Okay, let's say that the Giants lose the next two games against the Raiders and against Tampa Bay, right? So now they're 2-8. You're now 10 games in. Is there any world where you think now, whatever you think about Jason Garrett, but do you think that the Giants organization would get to a place where they would say, okay, fine, it's not going to be Joe Judge going forward. So we're going to fire him in season and give the reins in season to Jason Garrett and say, you now have the last 7 games of this season. Well, you can pick whatever arbitrary week you want, but you have 5 games. You have 6 games of the season to show us that your vanilla personality, whatever, that you can lead this team. And maybe if you were at the head position, things would look a little bit differently, specifically on the offensive side. Would you be in favor of that? Maybe even as opposed to, right, in the offseason, nobody would want to hear, we're letting go of Joe Judge. We're promoting Jason Garrett. No, we want to tear this thing down to the bones, probably. And we'll get to that in a second. But would you be in favor of, if the Giants lose another couple games and it just seems like it's the same old thing with Joe Judge, that they say, listen, that's it. You're not the guy going forward. We're moving on from you. And we're at least going to give a look to Jason Garrett for the remainder of this year to say, let's see what this team would look like in your hands. Because for whatever he's not, he at least was a good manager of talented teams in Dallas. And maybe there's this world where this team would look better offensively underneath Jason Garrett.
So I believe that would be a terrible mistake, and not necessarily because I think Joe Judge has earned the right to finish out the season, but I
Right.
think the Giants are a blue blood organization. They don't make knee jerk reactions, fire coaches mid season, or like it just doesn't feel like the right way that we go about our business. I think what would
But
be
is it
more
knee jerk at
interesting.
this point with the record, right?
Well, because firing Joe Judge would accomplish nothing. Like, what are we? Dave Gettleman is not going to be here come next season, right? So you're already getting a new general manager. You know that the new general manager is going to have their preference of what type of coach they want. So even promoting Jason Garrett with a couple games to go, what could he show? He's not going to save Dave Gettleman's job. The new GM is not going to want a retread from where he
No,
doesn't get
but
to hand pick and hand select,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Let me ask you this too. So, I mean, we're basically into it here, and we'll touch on the trade deadline stuff. Maybe we'll get to it next episode because the Giants didn't do anything. That's the bottom line. They wasted an opportunity. When Von Miller was traded, it came out that the Broncos would only have received a 5th-round compensatory pick for him had they held on to him through the year. So you can think about that in terms of Evan Ingram. That's it. There you go. That's the trade deadline stuff. We'll touch back on it later. Um, the point though about is you say, what do you know? If you promoted Jason Garrett and you fired Joe Judge, it's not going to save Dave Gettleman 100%. I think that the difference would be if we let go of Joe Judge and we promoted Jason Garrett, would it be saving potentially maybe Jason Garrett, obviously, in his opportunity within the organization, but also Daniel Jones? Because to your point, if the Giants season continues to go bad and they only finish with 5 wins or 6 wins, because we've still talked about, I'll still sit here and tell you there's a handful of games, 2 against the Eagles, against Washington, against Miami, right? Like there's wins out there for the Giants to still find their way at 6 or 7 by the end of the year. But maybe that move affords us to say, new GM can look at Daniel Jones and say, yes, he is the quarterback going forward. Or maybe I do have the head coach in Jason Garrett, right? And now as the GM, I want to look at personnel. I want to bring in more talent. I want to actually fix the offensive line. I want to get an edge rusher. All those little things we talk about with Dave Gettleman, like that, that would be the interesting piece. And the twofold value of it is, okay, if I can keep Jason Garrett somehow, then I get to keep continuity for Daniel Jones. Because remember, this is second year in the same system. So now if you go into next year and you could say it's going to be the same system again, that's important for quarterbacks. So, that's as much a reason, and we can even go including Joe Judge. I think this is as much a reason why the Giants want to stay the course with the head coach, because they want to keep the continuity for the quarterback that they think is the franchise QB. But it's such a convoluted structure that we have now, because if we all think that the season can't change the result for Dave Gettleman, that he's going to be gone through firing or, retirement, moving on to a new role inside of the organization, if he's going to be gone, that the new GM's going to come in and go, Joe Judge is my guy. I don't think so. I want a new new head coach. So no matter what happens here, a new GM is probably going to move off of Joe Judge, I would assume. And then if you're moving off of Joe Judge, the new head coach is going to bring in a new staff, and the new staff means a new system. So this is the problem. And I that's the question I'll put back to you again. I know that Jason Garrett is an unsexy hire, an unsexy move, and I'm not saying I would be in favor of it. But what I will say is, if not that move, which maintains continuity with Daniel Jones in the offense, then I think what we're talking about is, at the end of the year, you're going to have 2 picks in the top 10 or 11 with the way Chicago is trending. That's where you go. Head coach gone, entire staff gone, GM gone, quarterback gone. Because there's no world that a new GM comes in with a new head coach and they all go, unless it's going to be that hand down from John Mara. But I like the quarterback. And then if that's the case, you're going to go, well, this is a lame duck GM then, because that's the way it works in the NFL. No GM walks into a job and says, you know what I'm going to do? Take whatever you give me and then make my choices. Because you know who did do that? Dave Gettleman. That was the context of his hire. You get to be the GM, but I want to win with Eli Manning, and I want this and I want that from John Mara. So you can't go ahead and double down on what has been a clearly broken structure for the organization.
Well, so I think that is interesting to note, where you basically say, if it's not Joe Judge, if it's not Jason Garrett, if it's not Gettleman, then it's certainly not Daniel Jones. But I actually don't think that they're intertwined as much as maybe you do. I think when you're interviewing general managers, you say, tell me what you feel about the quarterback. What are you seeing? Do you feel like he's here? And you listen to the evaluation, you understand the vision that the GM has for the team. Maybe you end up picking the one that says, I think if we drafted an offensive lineman and an edge rusher, that Daniel Jones could be better than scoring 20 or
Sure.
more points in less than 50% of our games. Like, I don't necessarily think Daniel Jones is intertwined on this. Again, we talked about the stats from yesterday. He outplayed Patrick Mahomes, like he did. And Patrick Mahomes may be struggling right now, but Daniel Jones was still completing the ball. He obviously made that terrible interception early in the game, but he did settle in. He threw a beautiful touchdown to Rudolph, another touchdown to Ingram. I think is a world that you can separate Daniel Jones from the rest of all of this that's going on, and potentially still have him as the quarterback of the Giants with a completely new organization above him.
Okay, you can say that, but most track records around the NFL tell you that that doesn't work. Like, most GMs that come in move on from quarterbacks. Like they do, because they're never going to come in and say, by the way, how would the fan base feel? Like, regardless of our feelings about Daniel Jones, a new GM comes in and they say, I'm going to in some regards, I'm going to trust the evaluation of the previous regime. Because, by the way, supposedly it was it was Sherman, right? Pat Sherman, who convinced the Giants that taking Daniel Jones was the right move. So the prior head coach convinced you that this was a good quarterback to take. Then you moved on from that head coach. So you trusted him enough to have input there, but you didn't trust him enough to stay with him long term. Now you have a GM in Dave Gettleman, who's in the room to bring in Joe Judge. So you trusted him enough to hire the head coach, but then when you move forward, you know what I mean? Like, it's too convoluted, and almost, and I'll frame it this way, almost to the detriment maybe of the franchise and of the big picture here. sometimes you just have to say it's not about the quarterback even. It's not even about the individual players. It's just about getting back to neutral. Because, by the way, Dave Gettleman did exactly what Jerry Reese did at the end of his tenure. The Giants have no cap room in the offseason, very limited ability to make moves, whatever. And he goes out and makes these big splash signings, commits the Giants to big money. They're going to have $3 million of cap room next offseason and still choices to make about Saquon Barkley. So I'll go the layer further with you then. New GM gets brought in. Are you bringing back Saquon Barkley? Are you giving him the new contract? Because if you're going to say, well, listen, it's hard to do that. You made a mistake there, second overall pick, the money, all those things. Okay. It's the same thing when you're looking at Daniel Jones, because what you can't do as a new GM with the high draft picks and keeping Daniel Jones, what are you going to say? We actually talked about the Jets, by the way. And I'll paint a picture that I actually described for the Jets, where I said, even if you wanted to sign or draft a rookie QB, you still could have kept Sam Darnold and just let it play itself out and cushion yourself with your young rookie QB and gives him some time. But do you want a new GM to come in with a new head coach to keep Daniel Jones and then still draft the next franchise quarterback? You can't do it, right? Either you're committed to Daniel Jones or you're not. And where does that leave you? You're only 1 year away from having to re-up Daniel Jones. Like, painting a picture where you're in the same situation as the Jets were over the last couple of years is not something that Giants fans should be excited about.
Well, I think you touch on the bigger picture. You and I both believe in Daniel Jones, and we think he is the guy. You and I, right now, are at different sides when it comes to what we should do with Saquon Barkley or what our positioning is, and that's fine. What I think this, well, I mean, in a vacuum, do I want a guy that has all pro potential? Sure. Like, are you telling me that he's $6 million? Are you saying he's $16 million? Like, how,
Yeah. I mean,
you know what I mean? Like,
okay, no, and I do get your point, right? Like, is it
context is
Christian
relative.
McCaffrey money, or is it right, or is it something different? But let's split the difference here and say, are you interested in re-upping Saquon Barkley at 10 to 12 million a year?
Yes, 10 million a year. Yes,
because I'm not. Because
no, I know.
Because you're already crippled by the cap anyway. Like, you're already crippled by the cap to begin with. And we've already seen sample sizes around the league. And this is to the point about the offensive line and getting this thing fixed. We've already seen samples. Guys go down around the league. You got random players popping off for 100-yard games rushing. Like, the running back is a position, while I believe in high-end talent and committing to a pick if you want to. But at a certain point, like, Saquon Barkley is not an Ezekiel Elliott type runner. That's just not who he is. He's a 1-2 punch guy. He's supposed to be the Kareem Hunt to a Nick Chubb. Like, that's really what Saquon Barkley is at the NFL level. And his home run ability is phenomenal. And he can be an explosive, dynamic, incredible weapon for the New York Football Giants. And also, if you went into next off season with a new GM and a new head coach and you're keeping Daniel Jones, I'm still going to sit there and tell you, guess what? And this is the failing of the organization in recent years. You can get excited about the sexy players, but the first thing you have to do is get the guys that let the sexy players go to work. And that's the offensive line. It's the defensive line. It's all those little guys in the margins that you're not checking the boxes on. So if you re-up with Saquon Barkley, it means you're not signing an offensive lineman in free agency. It means you're not maybe going after an edge rusher that you like, improving the linebacking core, improving the safety position, whatever it may be, right? Like, you're not going to improve the team in other areas if you go for that first, when you know in the draft where you have 13 picks in the upcoming season, you use a third round running back. Guess what? He'll check a box for you, right? It's just, again, it's the same thing at Evan Ingram, the sexy player, the thing, oh, it's so hard to move off of. It's tantalizing what he could be. Yeah, if you were a really good team, but you're not. So all of those high talent players at premier positions, they don't matter nearly as much when your team is bad.
Did that feel good? Was that cathartic for you?
It always
Yeah, I
feels
mean, I could feel that pouring out of a different part of your soul as you were putting that one out there, Adam. Listen, again, we can disagree on Saquon for one specific reason, and that's because I think the Giants are misusing him as a weapon on the field anyway. He shouldn't be a guy that's running the ball 25 times up the middle. He needs to be getting the ball out in space and being a completely different type of player. Get the ball to him like you do Kadarius Toney maybe. But, think of him more as a weapon. And if you paid a really good weapon $10 million as opposed to a running back $10 million. But that's the side note. I think, to your point, though, every option has to be on the table at the end of this year. We know Dave Gettleman is not going to survive. I would be surprised unless the team turns it around and makes a run and gets to 500-ish. I don't think Joe Judge and Jason Garrett and that group are going to be around. I think as much as you could like Daniel Jones, as much as you could like Saquon, as much as you could like any player on the roster, the GM has full authority and full autonomy to make any changes to this roster that he sees that's in the best interest long term of the New York Football Giants. And the reason why, Adam, is because as much as we like some of these individual players, like being precious about any of them has gotten us into this moment that we are in today. Like, in
100%.
order to actually rebuild and build this thing the right way through the trenches, using those first round picks that you mentioned, you have to have all options available to you. It can't be, well, we paid Kenny Galladay and we paid Leonard Williams and James Bradbury, and we just signed a Dory Jackson, and Saquon Barkley sells jerseys, and Daniel Jones is like, every player is on the table in terms of evaluation. What can you get for them? How will it impact the cap? And what are the areas of need? And if the Giants do anything other than open it up for a GM to say, paint it with your paintbrush, do what you do to make this successful, we're just going to continue to retread these 2-6, 2-7 starts that we've had for years and years and years.
Yeah, and it's disappointing, man. And when you think about the schedule, just to round this out, and we'll come back in later in the week, we'll take a look ahead at the Sunday matchup with the Raiders, who are dealing with some of their own issues away from the field. And nothing fun about what's gone on with that organization over the last couple of weeks, and we'll certainly get into that a little bit. But to your point, the Giants are 2-6 right now. You have the Raiders in Tampa Bay after the bye week. And then you're going to get Philly, Dolphins, Chargers, who've muddled a little bit, but Dallas, Philly, Chicago, Washington. Like, listen, you could win both games against Philly and Chicago and Washington and Miami. That's 5 games. That's 7 wins. So you could already be right there. And if you just snuck one off of any of these other 4 games from the Raiders, Tampa Bay, Dallas, or the Chargers, you'd be talking about being 8-9. Even then, like, I think it matters, right? Like, we talked about this last week. Like, context matters here, though. Like, you don't get to stack up wins against terrible teams and say, hey, look at me. We got to 7 wins here. We're moving in the right direction. The injury component, sure, it plays a factor. But that's, again, an organizational piece that you brought up about number of injuries that occur around the league and the way the Giants just seem to get hit with the injury bug far more than most other teams. Like, I don't think you can get clouded like we did a little bit last year, right? Doesn't matter. You're competing for the division. You could have made the playoffs. Okay, you could have, but guess what? It would have been a mirage. You would have got your butt kicked in the first round of the playoffs or wild card game, whatever it was, and you would have been looking at what it means to move forward with this team. So, for me, barring the Giants getting big wins against the Raiders or Tampa Bay or the Chargers or Dallas, like those 4 games, you got to win 1 or 2 of those for me to sit here and say, okay, there's been these little hiccups, these little penalties here and there, but we are good enough to beat these teams. And so far this season, we have maybe once, if ever, said all 3 phases played good football together on Sunday or Monday or Thursday night. We just don't say it. And that does start at the head coach level. And again, what did he say? The fish stinks from the head down? Yeah, it does, Joe. And you are the stinky fish head. Like that's where we're at right now. It has to start somewhere. And you want to make the head Dave Gettleman? Fine. Then the head stinks and the body is also not so fresh. So, I don't know where you find something ripe about this team outside of maybe that over the back end of this season, the defense starts to showcase what it could have been capable of. But right now it's just too muddled. It's too all over the map. Not unlike when we talk about it, right? We end up grabbing in so many different directions because on a week-to-week basis, there's always something new to be bothered by, concerned by, or something that's eroding confidence you thought you had in a given player or a given position.
Yeah, one day it's the defense giving up too many points. It's a jump off sides. It's a missed interception. The next time it's the offense can't manufacture points. This time the Giants are finding a new phase to lose in, and that's the coaching making some poor decisions and clock management and putting players not in the best chance to succeed. And I think what'll be interesting when we come back in to do our preview of the Raiders game is what are you hoping to see and what are you hoping to get out of this game? Is a win, as a win, bottom line, the only thing that you need to see? Or, are we looking to evaluate talent? And I think there's going to be a whole host of ways that we as fans are going to have to look at these games and maybe not think as much about whether the Giants win and more how do certain players play.
Come back later in the week because at the end of the day, there are still another 9 games for the New York Football Giants to play
Ooh.
this year. So exactly. As Andy Makowitz said, ooh, we still have a lot to get through here. So listen, we've swung on the pendulum, but we need to try to figure out what boxes can we check? Could you check a box on a game to game basis? Can you check a box on a season to season basis? That's really where we are right now. We'll come back and rejoin us later in the week when we break down that matchup with the Raiders, set the expectations, and answer the question that Andy posed. What is good enough now going forward on a week to week basis? Do we move beyond the wins and losses, or do those still matter? You can follow us, of course, on social media, One Giant Podcast. You can get the podcast on all of those fantastic platforms that you choose to. And join us over on YouTube where we're doing the live streaming. We're going to try to ramp that up a little bit more as the season moves along. And maybe a little wrinkle, start to throw in some guys that you want to keep on around the league that could be free agents next year and moves that the Giants may look to make. We'll also, of course, talk that trade deadline chatter that did not happen for Big Blue. And until next time, guys, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand you the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.